It is 6:08 in the morning on a Tuesday in March, and the loading dock of Meridian Commercial Print Solutions on Haggerty Road in suburban Detroit has not processed a single print order in 14 months. The business is listed as suspended. The phone rings to a disconnected tone. The company's state filings show 0 employees and 0 revenue since the previous January. And yet, at 6:08 a.m. on this Tuesday morning, 12 agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, supported by a 6-member SWAT element and 2 Detroit field office vehicles, are lined up against the east wall of that same loading dock, 3 seconds from a forced breach. The team leader raises a closed fist. Then he opens it. The battering ram contacts the roll-up steel door at the lower panel, and the door buckles upward off its track in a single strike. 6 agents flood through the bay in a stack. 2 more peel left toward a secondary access point at the parts storage bay on the building's north face, where a man identified in pre-operation surveillance only as the site manager has just stepped out of a white Chevrolet Silverado and is now looking at the wrong end of drawn firearms. He does not run. He raises his hands. Inside, past the gutted print room floor, where offset presses once stood, there is a back room that the building's original blueprints call a climate-controlled paper storage annex. The blueprints are from 1997. What is in that room now is not paper. 3 CNC milling machines, each roughly the size of a mid-range office copier, stand in a row along the west wall. The machines are warm. They have been running through the night. Scattered across 2 steel work tables and 3 gray plastic totes are small, machined metal components. Compact, precisely toleranced, and absolutely not what their import documentation said they were. By the time the scene is secured at 6:31 a.m., the initial count from those totes alone is over 3,000 units. Final seizure numbers come later. When they do, the number is 4,400. 4,400 conversion switches. Parts small enough to hold between 2 fingers. Parts whose entire function, once installed in a compatible semi-automatic pistol, is to make that pistol fire automatically, continuously, until the trigger is released or the magazine is empty. Parts that are, under federal law, classified as machine guns. Parts that are entirely illegal to manufacture, transfer, or possess without a license that no one in this building holds. This is the result of 13 months of federal surveillance, 1 controlled wire, 17 trash pulls, and a single anomaly in an import manifest that a Customs and Border Protection analyst almost let slide. Almost. Here is where it started. Not with a tip, not with an informant, with a spreadsheet. In February of the year prior, a CBP trade analyst working commodity code reviews at the Port of Detroit, one of the agency's inland border crossings handling shipments arriving through Canadian transit, flagged an account under the name Meridian Industrial Supply LLC. The account had been importing under Harmonized Tariff Schedule Code 8443-99-90-050, a subclassification covering parts and accessories for printing presses and offset reproduction equipment. The account had filed 11 import entries in the previous 9 months. Total declared value, approximately $2.6 million. None of that is automatically suspicious. Print industry suppliers do move precision machined components internationally, and $2.6 million across 9 months for an active mid-scale operation is within a normal range. What was not normal was this. Meridian Commercial Print Solutions. The business filing tied to the same address, the same principals, the same federal employer identification number, had not filed a single sales tax remittance with the state of Michigan in over a year. Their commercial printing license had lapsed. Their listed equipment inventory, submitted during a routine state business review, showed no active presses. A company with no printing equipment, no active license, and no recorded revenue was importing $2.5 million worth of printer parts. The CBP analyst, we'll call him Agent Castillo in this reconstruction, did not immediately route the file to law enforcement. He pulled 3 of the import entries first, looking at the declared part descriptions. The entries listed the items as industrial nozzle blanks, unfinished, a term that maps to components used in certain high-precision inkjet systems. The declared unit weight per piece ranged from 11 to 14 grams. Castillo had spent 6 years in trade enforcement before moving to the analytical desk. He pulled the specification sheet for the nozzle blank family those entries referenced. The components in that product line weigh between 34 and 52 grams apiece. The declared shipments were too light, not slightly off, less than half the weight they should have been for the parts they claim to be. One analyst, one weight discrepancy, 11 seconds of cross-referencing a product spec sheet. That is the anomaly. Everything else that followed, the wire, the surveillance, the warrants, the raid, traces back to that one number that did not match. Going through the technical filings in this reconstruction, one detail kept nagging at me. The parts actually being imported fit the dimensional profile of a specific class of auto-sear conversion component almost exactly. Same approximate mass, same general footprint, same material density, consistent with hardened tool steel. The nozzle blank code was not randomly chosen. Someone had done the homework to find a tariff classification whose physical parameters were close enough to pass a casual review. This was deliberate. Castillo routed the file to CBP's Trade Fraud and Enforcement Division. That office contacted ATF's Detroit Field Division the following week. By the end of March, ATF had assigned a case agent, we'll call him Special Agent Rourke, and opened a formal investigation under a composite code name. The case file was thin: an import account, a dormant business address, a weight discrepancy. No criminal history on the principals, no prior ATF contact, no street-level intelligence connecting the Haggerty Road address to anything. 3 months of surveillance, Rourke would later tell the case team, produced almost nothing. Agents ran periodic drive-bys of the Haggerty Road facility. The building showed minimal activity. Lights sometimes on in the early morning hours, a van parked occasionally at the loading dock, no visible foot traffic. Trash pulls in May and June yielded shredded administrative paper, machine oil residue on shop rags, and packaging materials consistent with small precision components. Nothing that constituted usable evidence. Nothing that moved the case forward. The breakthrough did not come from the building. It came from the street. In late July, a firearms intelligence analyst at ATF's National Tracing Center in Martinsburg, West Virginia, was running a batch correlation on switch-type devices recovered at crime scenes across the Midwest during the previous quarter. The Tracing Center processes serialized firearms and parts recovered by law enforcement nationwide, attempting to identify manufacturing origins and distribution chains. Most auto-sear-type devices recovered on the street are imported or come from established illegal sources the center already tracks. But in this batch, 9 of the recovered switches, pulled from scenes in Detroit, Flint, Cleveland, and Toledo between April and July, showed the same distinctive tooling mark, a slight radial burr pattern at a specific point on the machined housing, consistent with a CNC milling tool that had not been fully calibrated for finishing passes. 9 switches, same burr, same pattern, same machine. The Tracing Center analyst flagged the cluster and cross-referenced it against open investigations. Rourke's case file came up. The Haggerty Road address came up. The import account came up. The weight anomaly that Castillo had pulled 7 months earlier suddenly had a direct line to 9 firearms already recovered from crime scenes across 4 cities. Rourke's supervisor approved a wire application within the week. The target of the wire was not the Haggerty Road facility directly. It was the import broker, a logistics intermediary company we'll call Lakeshore Transit Partners, operating out of Windsor, Ontario, across the river, through whom all 11 of Meridian's import filings had been processed. The theory was straightforward. If the broker was knowingly processing fraudulent import entries, communications between the broker and the Meridian principals would show coordination on the false classification. Get the wire on the broker. Let the broker lead back to the shop. The wire took 6 weeks to authorize. During that period, 2 more shipments cleared customs under the same nozzle blank code. ATF let them through. They needed the wire active before they moved. Something about this phase of the investigation rarely gets acknowledged in the public accounting of these cases. ATF watched 2 more shipments of illegal components enter the country because stopping them prematurely would have collapsed the larger case. That is a deliberate, calculated decision, and it has consequences on the street. Parts that cleared customs in August and September almost certainly became switches that ended up in guns that showed up at crime scenes months later. That is the cost of building a case that holds up. Is that the right call? Probably yes, most of the time. But it is worth understanding what it actually means. The wire went active in early October. The first 6 weeks of intercepts produced routine logistics traffic, shipping confirmations, customs filing acknowledgements, invoice reconciliations. The broker communicated with Meridian by email and, occasionally, by phone. The phone calls were brief, the language was careful, but not careful enough. On November 14th, a phone call between a Lakeshore Transit representative, we'll call him the broker contact, and the Meridian site manager, contained a reference the case team had been waiting for. The broker contact asked whether the latest tooling order had been received in good condition. The site manager confirmed it had and mentioned that the finish run is going to be tight this cycle because one of the machines needed a calibration adjustment. Tooling order, finish run, calibration adjustment. This is not the language of an inkjet nozzle supplier. This is CNC manufacturing language. Rourke's team pulled the import entry for the October shipment and requested physical examination of the declared nozzle blanks in CBP's bonded warehouse before release to the consignee. A CBP examiner with a background in precision machining pulled 3 units from the shipment and measured them. The parts were not nozzle blanks. They were roughed-out conversion switch bodies, unfinished, requiring final CNC milling to be functional, but dimensionally and materially consistent with auto-sear components for a commonly used pistol platform. Those 3 parts never left the warehouse, but the rest of the shipment, 300 additional units, had already been released under a prior release authorization 2 days before the physical examination. They were already at Haggerty Road. The problem was procedural and maddening. The prior release authorization had been filed by the broker before the case team flagged the October shipment for examination. Customs processing had functioned exactly as designed. 300 rough-machined illegal components had cleared the system without a single red flag because the paperwork was clean and the commodity code matched an established account with a clean prior import history. Rourke escalated to CBP's National Trade Enforcement Office. New protocols were put in place for the Meridian account going forward, but those 300 units were already on the CNC floor at Haggerty Road. Here is the part that does not make sense on the surface. A company with no legitimate business activity, no recorded revenue, importing $2.6 million in parts over 9 months, and it took 14 months from the first filing before anyone cross-referenced the business records against the import activity. The CBP Commodity Code Review System and the Michigan Business Licensing System do not talk to each other in any automated way. They are separate databases administered by separate agencies with separate mandates. Castillo found the discrepancy by manually pulling a business file he did not have to pull. There is no automated alert that would have generated that cross-reference without a human deciding to look. How many accounts like this one are still active right now? How many commodity codes are being used to move components that do not match their declared specifications? Through brokers with clean histories, to addresses that no longer have the businesses they claim to have? We do not know. That is the honest answer. By December, the case team had enough for a search warrant on the Haggerty Road facility, but Rourke made the decision to hold. The wire was still producing. In early December, phone intercepts captured a conversation between the site manager and a second individual, a distributor contact, based on context, discussing deliveries to multiple downstream recipients across several states. The site manager referenced the Ohio account and the guys in Indianapolis and a fulfillment schedule extending through the end of February. If ATF moved in December, they would take the shop, but likely not the distribution network. The switches already on the street would stay on the street, and the downstream recipients would scatter. Rourke and his supervisor decided to let the wire run through the winter. That decision almost collapsed the case. In January, a subsource, a lower-level individual connected to one of the downstream distribution points in Cleveland, was stopped by Cleveland police during a traffic stop. Officers found 11 switches in the vehicle. The individual was arrested on state charges. Inside the arrest report, filed in Cuyahoga County, the individual's residence was listed with an address that matched a location ATF had been watching as a potential downstream node. Ordinarily, that would not be a problem. The individual did not know about the federal investigation. But within 48 hours of the Cleveland arrest, wire intercepts showed the site manager at Haggerty Road making a series of calls to the broker contact and to an unidentified number. Calls that were shorter than usual, more terse, and included a reference to cleaning up the back shelf. Clean up the back shelf, the case team's interpretation. Someone had heard about the Cleveland arrest through a channel ATF had not mapped, and the site manager was considering moving product or sanitizing the CNC floor. Rourke called an emergency case review. The question was simple: execute now, with what they have, or risk the target destroying evidence. The team ran surveillance on Haggerty Road around the clock for the next 72 hours. Nothing moved. No vans left with unusual loads. No equipment was removed. Either the site manager had decided the Cleveland arrest was unconnected, or he had already made whatever preparations he intended to make. After 72 hours, Rourke made the call: hold through February and execute in early March, as originally planned. The distribution network had continued operating through January. The wire showed no evidence that fulfillment had stopped. It was a judgment call made on incomplete information, at 2 in the morning, by an agent who had been running this case for over a year. Put yourself in that position for a moment, watching a wire that goes quiet for 72 hours, knowing that evidence destruction takes less time than that, deciding whether to move early and blow the downstream case, or hold and risk losing everything. There is no clean answer. There is only the decision you make and what happens next. What happened next was that the wire came back to life in early February with new detail. The site manager confirmed a final run through mid-February, referenced a delivery schedule for March, and discussed pricing for what appeared to be a bulk order from the Indianapolis contact. The case team began parallel warrant preparation for the Haggerty Road facility and for 3 additional locations in Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois identified through wire intercepts as downstream distribution points. By the last week of February, Rourke's team had executed on all the paperwork. The search warrant for Haggerty Road was signed by a federal magistrate in the Eastern District of Michigan on February 27th. Arrest warrants for the site manager and the Lakeshore Transit broker contact were signed the same day. Coordination with ATF field officers in Columbus, Indianapolis, and Chicago established simultaneous takedown timelines for the downstream locations. U.S. Marshals were tasked with 3 of the fugitive apprehension elements for individuals not expected to be at their registered addresses. The tactical plan for Haggerty Road was straightforward in concept. Primary breach at the loading dock, secondary element on the north access point to cover the parking area where surveillance had shown the site manager typically arrived between 5:45 and 6:15 a.m. No flashbang deployment inside the building. The CNC machines represented potential evidence, and the case team did not want any risk of fire or equipment damage that could complicate the physical evidence. On the morning of the raid, the complication no one had planned for was the weather. A late winter ice storm had pushed through southeastern Michigan overnight, leaving the Haggerty Road parking area and the loading dock approach covered in 3/4 of an inch of black ice. The Bearcat G3 armored vehicle assigned to the operation could navigate it. The standard issue agent vehicles could not approach without risking loss of control. The tactical team adjusted on the fly. The Bearcat would stage at the East Bay approach. The agent vehicles would stage 1 block north on the dry-surfaced commercial access road, and agents would approach on foot across the iced lot. It added approximately 4 minutes to the staging timeline and required every agent on the approach to walk the distance in full tactical kit across a surface with essentially no traction. They made it. At 6:08 a.m., they were in position. At 6:09 a.m., the roll-up door came off its track. Inside, the CNC floor was exactly as surveillance and the wire had suggested. 3 machines, 2 work tables, the totes. The site manager, caught in the parking lot, offered no resistance. A second individual found inside the building, a technician who had apparently been running a night finishing cycle, was taken into custody at the north access point. The machines were still running when agents reached them. The finishing cycle running through the night was interrupted mid-pass. Agents documented and photographed the machines in their active state before powering them down per evidence protocol. The initial tote count at the scene was 3,218 units. A subsequent search of a locked storage room adjacent to the CNC floor, a room that did not appear on the 1997 building blueprint and had been built as a partition addition sometime in the intervening years, produced an additional shipping container with 1,182 units in sealed packaging, already labeled and prepared for outbound delivery. Total on-site seizure, 4,400 conversion switches, 3 CNC milling machines, a complete tooling set, approximately 14 kilograms of raw stock material, and in the locked storage room, a notebook, handwritten, spiral-bound, that the case team would later describe as a de facto distribution ledger, recording quantities, dates, and alphanumeric codes corresponding to the downstream recipient accounts identified through the wire. The notebook. That detail stuck with me. Every other aspect of this operation had been careful. The commodity code selection, the broker structure, the false business filings, and then a handwritten ledger in a storage room in plain view of anyone with a search warrant. Sometimes the most sophisticated supply chain ends with a spiral notebook on a shelf. By 9 a.m. on the morning of the raid, simultaneous operations had executed in Columbus, Indianapolis, Chicago, and Gary, Indiana. The Columbus element produced 3 arrests and the seizure of approximately 340 switches at a storage unit facility. The Indianapolis element produced 2 arrests, 180 switches, and a quantity of cash consistent with recent transactions. The Chicago operation produced 4 arrests at 2 separate locations. The Gary element produced a single arrest. U.S. Marshals apprehended 2 additional individuals in the Detroit metro area who had been identified through the wire but were not at the primary location on the morning of the raid. One was taken into custody at his residence in Warren, Michigan. The second was located at a gas station in Dearborn. Total arrests across all elements on execution day, 16. 3 additional individuals were indicted in subsequent weeks based on evidence developed from the seizures and the distribution ledger, bringing the total to 19 individuals across 5 states. The charges span multiple federal statutes: unlawful manufacture of machine guns, unlawful transfer of machine guns, conspiracy, and in several cases, additional charges related to the fraudulent import filings, wire fraud, and false statements to a federal agency. The site manager and the Lakeshore Transit broker contact face the most serious exposure. Federal prosecutors have indicated sentencing recommendations in the range of 12 to 15 years for the site manager, based on the volume of manufactured devices and the evidence connecting those devices to crime scenes. For the broker contact, the fraudulent import filings carry additional mandatory minimums that stack onto the firearms charges. Of the 4,400 switches seized at Haggerty Road, forensic analysis by ATF's Firearms and Ammunition Technology Division has so far positively linked 1,100 units to specific firearms recovered at crime scenes across the Midwest, matched through the distinctive tooling Burr pattern first identified by the Tracing Center analyst in West Virginia. 1,100 switches, 1,100 individual firearms, at minimum, that were at some point converted to fire automatically. Each one a crime scene, each one a victim, or a potential victim. The remaining 3,300 switches were seized before they reached the street. Where they would have gone, which cities, which networks, which incidents, is impossible to know now. Which is the point? Here is the unpopular take, and we'll say it plainly. The import code that Meridian used, HTS 844399.5050, is still an active, valid tariff classification. The specific subcode exploited in this case has not been flagged for enhanced inspection protocols as of the date of this case's resolution. The vulnerability that Castillo identified through a manual cross-reference he was not required to perform is still present in the system, because fixing it would require a formal interagency data sharing agreement between CBP's trade enforcement function and state business licensing databases. And that agreement does not yet exist. 11 months after the Meridian account was flagged, there is no automated mechanism that would have generated the same flag on a different account using the same method. That is a failure of system design, not of individual effort. Worth saying clearly, because the people who exploited it knew it existed before the people responsible for closing it did. 19 indictments is the right outcome for the individuals involved. But the institutional gap that allowed $2.6 million in illegal components to clear customs over 9 months deserves the same level of scrutiny that those individuals are now receiving. The people who built that CNC floor are going to prison. The tariff code they used to build their supply chain is still open. Comment yes or no. Do you think CBP and state business licensing agencies should have automated data sharing for import accounts above a certain threshold? We read every response. The $2.6 million in traced import value represents the supply chain cost of building a 4,400-unit illegal conversion switch operation. That number is worth sitting with. The downstream value, what those switches sold for, or would have sold for at street distribution prices, is estimated by case analysts to be substantially higher, though precise figures are difficult to establish from the distribution ledger alone, which used coded pricing rather than explicit dollar amounts. ATF's financial investigators are pursuing parallel asset forfeiture proceedings against accounts connected to the Meridian principals and the broker. The 3 CNC machines seized at Haggerty Road have been transported to ATF's evidence facility in Columbus for technical analysis. Investigators want to know where the machines came from, when they were acquired, and whether the specific tooling configuration, the configuration that produced the identifiable Burr pattern, was deliberately chosen or incidental. If deliberate, it suggests a level of operational sophistication indicating prior manufacturing experience. If incidental, it tells a different story about who was actually running the technical side of this operation. That question is still open. 19 people are indicted. 4,400 switches are in federal evidence storage. 3 CNC machines will not mill another part. And somewhere, in a bonded warehouse that no one has checked yet, there may be another shipment of industrial nozzle blanks waiting for release to a consignee whose business license lapsed 2 years ago. We track what comes next. Subscribe to the Bureau Files so the next case finds you first. The investigation dismantled one supply chain. It did not dismantle the demand. The crime scenes that produced those 1,100 match switches are still closed cases with victims who are still counting the cost. The networks that paid for those deliveries are still operating, restructured, redistributed, looking for the next meridian. And the commodity code that made it all possible is still on the books. There is a line in the case team's affidavit supporting the original search warrant application. It reads, "In summary, the described anomaly is not an artifact of sophisticated evasion. It is an artifact of routine process. The subject exploited a gap that required no technical capability to identify, only the patience to look for it. Only the patience. Leanne, 1 weight discrepancy. 11 grams that should have been 34. A number on a spec sheet that one analyst happened to check. That is what it took. 13 months of work, 12 agents on the stack, 4 simultaneous raids in 4 states, 19 indictments, and a spiral notebook on a shelf. And the question that remains, the question that Castillo probably still asks himself, is how many shipments cleared on the other days? The days he did not pull that file. The entries no one cross-referenced. The commodity codes no one has a reason to look at twice. How many machined parts, this quarter, are moving through the system as something harmless? Who is checking the dimensions?